What could make a ruthless millionaire surrender to true love? One innocent phrase changed his destiny forever. Where are you watching from? Tell us in the comments. If you want to discover how this true love story transformed his life, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This story will touch your heart. The aroma of cinnamon and warm butter hung in the air of the small bakery when Michael Reynolds pushed the glass door open for the first time. His Italian leather shoes contrasted oddly with the worn vintage tile floor, but nobody paid attention. All eyes were fixed on Emily behind the counter, whose hands trembled slightly as she decorated a Christmas cake with candied fruit. She didn't look up when the bell jingled, not out of rudeness, but because she was completely absorbed in her work, biting her lower lip in pure concentration, a small smudge of flour on her left cheek, like a solitary constellation. He had walked in by chance, escaping a boring meeting in his air-conditioned Fifth Avenue office, seeking something authentic, something that would remind him of a time when life had flavor. At 42, Michael carried the weight of an empire built on ruthless negotiations and calculated decisions. His routine consisted of numbers, charts, and the bitter taste of an espresso drunk alone in silent meeting rooms. He had lost the capacity to be surprised long ago, or so he thought. When Emily finally looked up, with those hazel eyes overflowing with genuine kindness, something inside him stirred like an old window being opened after years of closure. She smiled with a shyness that was neither calculated nor rehearsed, simply authentic, and asked what she could do for him. Her voice had the sweetness of cotton candy melting on the tongue, with that slight Brooklyn accent that transformed every word into melody. He ordered something simple, a croissant and a cappuccino, but she insisted on warming the croissant, explaining that it was much better warm, with the ideal texture, the Vermont butter releasing all its aroma. "Please, eat slowly," she said, her cheeks blushing slightly. "It's very hot. I wouldn't want you to burn yourself." At that moment, with those words pronounced with sincere concern for a perfect stranger, the man who negotiated million-dollar contracts without blinking felt his heart, that organ he believed atrophied, violently awaken. Michael sat at the small table near the window, observing life flowing in this ordinary Brooklyn street. Children running to school, elderly people walking slowly with their shopping bags, lovers holding hands. A life he had stopped noticing years ago. He bit into the croissant. The crust crackled delicately, releasing a butter aroma that instantly transported him to his grandmother's kitchen in Louisiana. The flaky layers separated with perfect lightness, melting on his tongue. It wasn't just a croissant, it was a Proustian Madeleine, a time capsule that returned him to a time when he still knew how to marvel. He began, searching for the right words. "I know," Emily replied with a knowing smile. "Sometimes the simplest things are the most important, aren't they?" That phrase resonated within him like a carillon. How many simple things had he neglected, sacrificed on the altar of success and power? How many moments like this had he missed? The most beautiful discoveries are often made by chance, at the turn of a street you never thought to take, he thought, as life around him suddenly seemed to regain its colors, like an old photograph restored. During the next 3 weeks, Michael returned every day, always at the same time, always ordering something different just to hear her describe each pastry, with a passion he had never felt for anything in his life. She spoke of ingredients as if they were treasures. The cinnamon that came from Ceylon, the chocolate that slowly melted on the tongue, the honey from upstate New York that a beekeeper brought every Monday, the almonds that gave perfect texture to the macarons. Every word was an invitation to a world where things had meaning beyond their monetary value. At the office, his colleagues began noticing subtle changes. Michael Reynolds, the man who never left his office before 8 in the evening, was now leaving promptly at 5. He who never granted more than 2 minutes to a personal conversation found himself asking his secretary how her son was doing, or inquiring about his assistant's parents' health. Smiles appeared on his face at unexpected moments, as if a pleasant thought had suddenly crossed his mind. "Mr. Reynolds, is everything all right?" asked Paul, his assistant of 10 years, one afternoon when Michael had declined 3 important calls to contemplate the rain gently falling on Fifth Avenue. "For the first time in a long time, Paul." "I believe so," he answered, surprised himself by this truth. On the 4th Thursday, he arrived at the bakery earlier than usual, and found Emily sitting at a table in the back room, with hunched shoulders, her head in her hands. She started when she saw him. "I'm sorry, we're not open yet," she said, quickly wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving another trace of flour on her face. "You're crying," he noted, feeling an unexpected pain in his chest at the sight. "No, it's just the flour. It irritates my eyes sometimes," she lied with a forced smile. "I may be a heartless businessman, but I can still recognize the difference between flour and tears," he said gently. "What's wrong?" Emily hesitated, nibbling her lower lip, a gesture he had learned to recognize as a sign of inner conflict. Finally, she sighed. "It's Matthew, my brother. He was accepted to MIT for his engineering studies. It's wonderful, a dream he's been pursuing for years. But the fees," she shook her head. "I don't know how I'll be able to pay. With the rent increasing, the money I send to my parents—" "I can help you," he offered immediately. "No," she replied firmly, her eyes suddenly shining with fierce pride. "I don't want your charity. I'll find a solution. I've always found one." Michael felt something break and rebuild simultaneously within him. This woman who had so little refused the help he could so easily offer. It was a foreign concept to him, this pride that defied the cold logic of numbers. "It's not charity," he protested. But what was it exactly? Friendship? Admiration? Something deeper that he dared not yet name. "It's up to me to solve my problems," she said softly but firmly. "I appreciate you, Mr. Reynolds, truly. Your visits are a ray of sunshine in my days. But I must remain independent. It's all I have." That night, lying in his king-size bed in his Upper East Side penthouse, Michael contemplated the ceiling, unable to sleep. For the first time since he had left his native Louisiana to conquer New York, he felt powerless. All his fortune, all his power, all his connections couldn't buy what he now desired most: Emily's trust. Michael discovered that Emily supported 3 younger siblings, Matthew, Charlotte, and little Luke, after their parents had to return to their small town in Vermont 5 years earlier. Her father had suffered an accident that left him with severe physical limitations, unable to continue the physical work in the bakery, and her mother had to take care of him in the countryside, where life was quieter and costs lower. The bakery was the family dream, recipes that her grandmother had passed down from generation to generation, and Emily had taken over the business alone at 19, without experience, only with love and determination. She worked 16 hours a day, woke up at 4 in the morning to prepare the pastry doughs, sent money to her parents every month, and still found the energy to smile at each customer as if they were the most important person in the world. One rainy Tuesday morning, Michael was waiting in front of the still-closed bakery, a black umbrella in hand. When Emily arrived at 4:45, with hair wet from the pouring rain, she looked at him with astonishment. "Mr. Reynolds, what are you doing here at this hour?" "Michael," he corrected. "Call me Michael, please, and I've come to learn." "Learn?" She looked at him in confusion as she unlocked the door. "To make croissants, pastries, anything you want to teach me." Emily burst into a crystalline laugh that resonated in the still-sleeping street. "You? You want to learn to make pastries?" "Why not?" he asked, slightly offended. She eyed him, her gaze sliding from his carefully combed hair to his Burberry coat, down to his perfectly polished shoes. "Because it's physical, messy, exhausting work. Your hands." She gestured toward his manicured hands. "They've never known hard work, have they?" He felt the blush rise to his cheeks. "I can learn. I want to learn, please." Something in his tone, perhaps the unusual vulnerability, made her hesitate. "Why?" "Because I want to understand your world. Because I want to be more than the man in the suit who comes to order pastries. Because something in you has awakened a part of me I thought was dead." All these answers swirled in his head, but none left his lips. "Because sometimes the simplest things are the most important," he finally said, repeating her own words. A smile slowly formed on Emily's face, illuminating her tired features. "Okay," she said, "but on one condition." "Which?" "You'll have to wear an apron. And I won't be nice because you're who you are." "I expected nothing less," he replied, feeling an irrepressible smile spread across his face. Thus began his apprenticeship. He arrived at 5 in the morning, in jeans and a simple t-shirt, and worked alongside her until the bakery opened. He was indeed terrible. He burned everything, confused sugar and salt, forgot the pastries in the oven until they became charcoal. But he didn't give up. And for the first time in his life, failure didn't make him angry. It motivated him, because each mistake brought him closer to her. Each shared laugh when he spilled cream batter on the floor built a bridge between two worlds that seemed irreconcilable. "No, no, no," exclaimed Emily one morning, taking his hand to show him the correct movement to fold the puff pastry. "You must be firm but gentle, like this." Her hand on his caused an electric shock that ran up his arm. She must have felt it too, because she quickly withdrew her hand, cheeks red, and pretended she needed to check something in the refrigerator. Another day, as he finally managed to shape a croissant that actually looked like a croissant, she applauded with such enthusiasm that he felt prouder than when he had concluded his first $1 million contract. "See? You're making progress," she exclaimed, her face radiant. "I knew you could do it." These simple words stirred in him a warmth that no professional validation had ever produced. "Michael, where the hell have you been these last few weeks?" asked Frank White, his main partner, during a board meeting. "You arrive late, leave early, miss important calls. This isn't like you." Michael adjusted his tie, suddenly aware of the inquisitive looks around the table. These men and women in dark suits had been his universe for 20 years. Now they seemed like strangers observing an exotic creature. "I'm exploring new opportunities," he replied vaguely. "What kind of opportunities? A new market? An acquisition?" pressed Frank. Michael imagined their reactions if he told them the truth. "I wake up at 4 in the morning to learn to make pastries in a small Brooklyn bakery. I'm fascinated by a woman who values authenticity more than money. I'm starting to think that my entire life up to now has been a huge waste." "Personal ones," he said simply. "Nothing that will affect the company, I assure you." This response was met with perplexed silence. Michael Reynolds, the man for whom the company had always been his whole life, was now talking about personal interests. Later that day, alone in his office, Michael contemplated the view of New York, a city he had always seen as a chessboard, a playground for his ambitions. Now he wondered how many small bakeries like Emily's existed out there, how many people like her struggled every day to preserve something authentic in an increasingly commercial world. His phone vibrated. A message from Emily. "Luke got an A on his math test. He says it's thanks to your help with his homework. He wants to show you his report card tomorrow." Michael smiled. During these past weeks, he had gotten to know Emily's siblings. Matthew with his dreams of engineering studies, Charlotte who wanted to become a classical ballet dancer, and Luke who missed his parents and asked when they would return from Vermont. He had started helping Luke with his math homework on Saturday afternoons, finding unexpected joy in explaining concepts he mastered to a child eager to learn. Another message arrived. "I made pistachio macarons. Your favorite. I'll set some aside for you tomorrow." His heart leaped. She remembered his preference, an insignificant detail, but one that meant everything. Frank entered his office without knocking, a habit that had never bothered him before, but now seemed an intrusion. "Michael, we need to discuss the Brooklyn project. The demolitions will begin next month, and we need to finalize the plans for the boutique hotel. The investors are impatient." Michael froze. "Which Brooklyn project?" Frank handed him a file. "The project you approved 6 months ago. The transformation of that old neighborhood into an upscale tourist zone. We've almost finalized all the acquisitions." Michael flipped through the file, his heart accelerating. There was a detailed plan of the area, and at the center, highlighted in red, was the block that included Emily's bakery. "I don't remember approving this," he said, his throat tight. Frank shrugged. "You sign dozens of documents every day. This one went through months ago. The important thing is that everything is in order. The last tenants have a 3-month deadline to vacate the premises." The last tenants, Emily, her bakery, her life, everything she had worked for. The realization hit him like a physical blow. "Cancel it," he said, his voice firmer than he expected. "Excuse me?" Frank looked at him as if he had just suggested burning money. "I said cancel this project. Find another area, or modify it to preserve the existing businesses." "Is this a joke?" Frank burst out laughing, then, seeing Michael's serious expression, composed himself. "Michael, We've already invested millions in this project. The contracts are signed. The investors expect returns. You can't simply— I'm still the CEO of this company, aren't I? Interrupted Michael, his voice dangerously calm. Then find a solution. I don't care about the cost. This project will not destroy those businesses. Period. Frank stared at him, dumbfounded. What's happening to you, Michael? Are you going through some kind of midlife crisis or something? Maybe, replied Michael, turning back to the window. Maybe I'm finally starting to see things clearly. That night, lying in his bed, unable to sleep, Michael made a decision. He couldn't tell Emily that he was indirectly responsible for the threat hanging over her bakery. But he could do something to protect her, even if she would never know. Then came the first big storm. The building next to the bakery was sold to a developer who planned to demolish everything and build a boutique hotel for tourists. Her lease would expire in 3 months and the landlord wouldn't renew it. Emily was devastated. All those early mornings, all those efforts, the sacrifice of being away from her parents when they needed her most, and now everything would collapse like a house of cards. Michael found her sitting on the steps behind the bakery after closing time. It was raining lightly, but she didn't seem to care, the drops mixing with the tears on her face. "Emily," he said gently, sitting next to her and sharing his umbrella. "I'm sorry." She didn't answer, staring at the wet ground. "I can help you," he offered. "I could buy another location, or pay your rent elsewhere, or even—" "No," she interrupted, her voice tired but determined. "I've already told you. I don't want your charity." "It's not charity," he protested. "It's—" "What is it then?" she asked, finally looking at him. Her eyes, reddened by tears, contained an intensity that unsettled him. "Why would a man like you be so interested in a simple baker like me? Is it a project for you? A distraction? A charitable work to appease your conscience?" Michael felt each word like a slap. "No, it's not like that at all," he said, desperately searching for the right words. I care about you, about this bakery, about what you represent." Emily shook her head. "You don't understand. This bakery isn't just a business. It's my family's legacy. It's my parents' sweat and tears. It's my way of taking care of my siblings. It's my independence. It's all I am." "I understand more than you think," he murmured. "How could you understand?" she retorted. "You were born with a silver spoon in your mouth. You've never had to worry about paying rent or feeding your family." Michael felt a wave of anger rise within him, not at her, but at the image she had of him. "You think you know me, don't you?" he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Let me tell you something, Emily. I was born on a farm in Louisiana. My father was a small farmer who woke up at 4 in the morning like you. My mother made jams she sold at the market. I worked in the fields as soon as I was old enough to hold a hoe." Emily was now looking at him with surprise. "I got a scholarship to study in New York. I worked as a waiter in the evenings to pay for my books. I climbed the ladder, one step at a time, without anyone's help." He paused, surprised by his own vehemence. "So yes, I succeeded. I built something from nothing. But along the way, I lost something important, something you've always kept." "What?" she asked softly. "Authenticity, passion, the ability to see beauty in small things, the simple joy of creating something with your hands that makes people smile." He took a deep breath. "That's why I come here, not out of condescension or pity, but because you reminded me what it was like to truly live." Silence settled between them, punctuated only by the soft sound of rain on the umbrella. Emily looked at him as if she was seeing him for the first time. "I didn't know," she finally said. "You never mentioned it." "It's not something I talk about. To anyone." He shrugged. "It's easier to play the role that's expected of me." Emily wiped her tears with her sleeve. "What role are you playing with me, Michael?" The question caught him off guard. "None," he realized. "This is perhaps the first time in years that I'm simply myself." She smiled weakly. "I like this version of you." Michael felt his heart race. "Emily, But she raised a hand to stop him. "I'm still angry about this situation, and I still don't want your financial help, but thank you for listening, for understanding." She stood up, shaking the water from her skirt. "I'll find a solution. I don't know how yet, but I will." Michael watched her go back into the bakery, wondering how he could ever tell her that the solution was already in progress, that he had already bought the building through a shell company, that he had modified the project to protect her bakery, and that he was ready to sacrifice everything to preserve that small corner of authenticity she had created. Michael began sending corporate clients to the bakery, discreetly, without her knowledge. Executives who previously ordered cakes from expensive establishments in the Upper East Side began appearing in this simple Brooklyn street. Orders increased. Holiday cakes for corporate parties, baskets of macarons for Christmas, trays of petit fours for celebrations. One morning, while preparing croissant dough, Emily excitedly announced that she needed to hire an assistant to handle the influx of new orders. "It's strange," she said, her cheeks red with excitement. "Suddenly, all these big companies are discovering my little bakery. Yesterday, someone ordered 100 boxes of macarons for an event at the Plaza Hotel." Michael smiled innocently. "Maybe quality always ends up being recognized." She gave him a suspicious look. "You wouldn't have anything to do with this by any chance?" "Me?" He feigned surprise. "How could I influence such decisions?" Emily didn't press, but her smile indicated she wasn't fooled. That evening, for the first time, she accepted his dinner invitation. Not at a Michelin-starred restaurant as he had initially proposed, but at a small bistro in the neighborhood that she loved. They sat at a table near the window, the comfortable buzz of the restaurant enveloping them like a warm blanket. Emily had traded her apron for a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes. Michael found her more beautiful than ever. "So, how did you convince all these companies to order from me?" she asked directly after they had ordered. Michael smiled, admitting his defeat. "I might have mentioned to a few contacts that the best bakery in New York was hiding in a small Brooklyn street." Emily shook her head, but her smile betrayed her amusement. "You're impossible." "I only told the truth," he defended himself. "Your creations deserve to be known." She played with the edge of her napkin. "You know, thanks to these orders, I might be able to send Matthew to MIT after all. And Charlotte can continue her dance classes. I'm happy for you," he said sincerely. "You deserve it." A comfortable silence settled between them, filled by the sounds of the restaurant and the soft music in the background. "Michael," she finally said, her serious tone drawing all his attention, "why are you doing all this?" "The truth, this time." He looked at his hands, searching for the right words. "Because since I met you, the world seems different, more vivid, more authentic. Because your courage and determination inspire me. Because I believe I'm falling in love with you." The words remained unspoken, hanging in the air between them. "I understand," she said softly, as if she had heard his thoughts. "But I need to tell you something. I'm not from your world and you're not from mine. Despite our similar origins, our lives have taken very different paths." "Paths can cross," he responded. "Sometimes," she conceded. "But often they continue in different directions." He felt his heart tighten. "Is that your way of telling me not to hope?" Emily looked out the window, observing the passers-by in the street lit by street lamps. "It's my way of telling you that I can't promise anything. My life is complicated, my responsibilities are heavy. I can't afford distractions or complications." "And that's what I am? A distraction? A complication?" he asked, unable to mask his hurt. She turned to him, her eyes shining with an emotion he couldn't quite decipher. "No, you are dangerous." "Dangerous?" he repeated, confused. "Dangerous because you make me hope. You make me imagine possibilities that I can't afford to consider. You make me want things beyond my current responsibilities." The word struck him with unexpected force. The idea that Emily might feel something for him, that she might be fighting against her feelings as he was fighting against his, was both exhilarating and terrifying. "What do you want, Emily?" he asked softly. "Not what you think you should do, not what you believe is reasonable. What you want, really." She took a deep breath as if preparing to dive into deep waters. "I want to be free, free from my constant worries, free from the fear of disappointing my family, free to consider a future that isn't entirely defined by my responsibilities." Their fingers brushed on the table, a contact light as a feather but charged with electricity. "And where do I fit in?" he murmured. "You," she hesitated, "you represent a freedom that I can't grant myself." Michael felt these words like a simultaneous cold and hot shower. She felt something for him. It was obvious now. But this feeling was chained by circumstances, by responsibilities, by the differences between their worlds. He took her hand in his, surprised when she didn't withdraw it. What if we could change these circumstances? If we could find a way to reconcile our worlds? Emily smiled sadly. Life isn't a fairy tale, Michael. Real problems aren't solved by grand gestures or romantic declarations. No, he agreed. They're solved by concrete actions, by perseverance, by the willingness to change. And I'm ready to do all of that. She looked at him for a long time, as if assessing his sincerity. Finally, she squeezed his hand slightly. Then show me. Not with your money or your influence. Show me with who you really are. At that moment, Michael knew he had made a decision that would change the course of his life. A decision that frightened the businessman in him, but that made the man he once was, the man he wanted to become again, sing. For 6 months, a new routine was established. Michael woke before dawn, something unthinkable a few months earlier, and worked alongside Emily. He learned the difference between stirring gently and stirring quickly, when a dough needs to rest, when the baking is perfect. He got to know her siblings, Matthew with his dreams of engineering studies, Charlotte who wanted to become a classical ballet dancer, and Luke who missed his parents and asked when they would return from Vermont. But most importantly, he learned to listen, really listen. When Emily talked about the difficulties of paying rent in the city, sending enough money for her father's treatments, the constant fear of losing everything her family had built with their calloused hands. One Saturday afternoon, while they were preparing a special order for a wedding together, Emily surprised him by asking, "Tell me about your company." Michael, focused on the delicate task of placing sugar flowers on a cake, looked up in surprise. "My company? Why?" "Because it's important to you," she said simply, "and I want to know everything that's important to you." These words warmed him more than the oven at full power. "It's not very interesting," he said modestly. "Let me be the judge of that." She smiled, adding a touch of food coloring to her icing. "How did you create it?" Michael put down his decorating tweezers and reflected. "I started with almost nothing, just an idea and a lot of determination." He told her how, fresh from Harvard Business School, he had identified a niche in the real estate market that no one else seemed to see, the rehabilitation of old industrial buildings into modern, multifunctional spaces. How he had convinced a bank to lend him just enough to buy an old warehouse in Brooklyn. How he had worked day and night, often with his own hands, to transform that dilapidated space into something beautiful and functional. The first project was a success, then another and yet another. I hired talented people, built a team, expanded my vision. And before I knew it, I was running one of the largest real estate companies in New York. Emily listened attentively, her hands continuing to work mechanically on the cake. "You must have been proud," she said. "I was," he admitted. But at some point, something changed. It was no longer about creating beauty from decrepitude. It became about numbers, returns, constant expansion. "What changed?" she asked. Michael reflected on this question more deeply than he ever had. "I suppose I lost sight of why I had started. I forgot the excitement of creating something with my hands, the satisfaction of seeing an abandoned space come back to life, the joy of seeing people inhabit and love these places I had helped to revive. And now, he looked at her, suddenly realizing the truth. Now, I'm beginning to remember. Thanks to you, thanks to this bakery, thanks to these flower-covered hands." Emily smiled, touched. "You know, our jobs aren't so different. We both take raw ingredients and transform them into something that brings joy." This simple but profound comparison struck him. She was right. In his pursuit of growth and profit, he had forgotten the very essence of what he loved about his work. That evening, returning to his luxurious but empty penthouse, Michael couldn't help but notice the stark contrast with the warm little bakery he had just left. His apartment was tastefully decorated, filled with expensive artwork and designer furniture, but it lacked that indefinable quality that made the bakery so alive, that feeling of being in a place where every object had a story, where every corner held a memory. He sat at his desk and began to scribble ideas, plans, visions for the future, not for his next acquisition or expansion strategy, but for something more personal, more meaningful. a transformation that would reflect the one happening within him. Michael distanced himself, not completely, but enough for her to feel his absence. He stopped appearing every day, returned to his world of meetings and negotiations, but now everything seemed colorless, tasteless, meaningless. His assistant, Paul, noticed that he doodled drawings of croissants and pastries in the margins of documents. His associates commented that he seemed distant, lost, as if he had left a part of his soul somewhere between Brooklyn and Fifth Avenue. "Mr. Reynolds, the board is waiting for your decision regarding the merger offer," reminded Paul, standing in the doorway of his office. Michael was staring out the window, lost in his thoughts. The rain was beating against the glass, creating a hypnotic rhythm that reminded him of the sound of rain on the small awning of Emily's bakery. "Sir?" insisted Paul. "Oh yes, the merger." Michael turned to his faithful assistant. "What is your opinion, Paul?" Paul blinked, surprised. In 15 years of service, it was the first time Michael had asked for his personal opinion on a business decision. "My opinion, sir?" "Yes. Do you think this merger is beneficial for the company?" Paul hesitated, then answered with unexpected frankness. "Financially, without a doubt. But, encouraged Michael. "But it's not the type of project that built Reynolds Development's reputation. We're known for our creative vision, our respect for architectural heritage, our ability to reinvent spaces while preserving their soul. This merger would transform us into something else." Michael smiled. "Exactly what I was thinking. Thank you, Paul. Tell the board I'm declining the offer." "Sir?" Paul seemed astounded. "That's millions of dollars. Money isn't everything, Paul." "I've learned that recently." Michael stood up, putting on his jacket. "Cancel my meetings for the rest of the day. I have something important to do." He left the building in the midst of a storm, ignoring the rain that soaked his tailored suit. His steps led him instinctively toward Brooklyn, toward the small bakery that had become his refuge, his anchor to reality. But when he arrived, he found the bakery closed, a small sign indicating "closed for personal reasons" hanging on the door. A wave of concern overwhelmed him. Emily had never closed the bakery, even when she was sick or exhausted. He took out his phone and called her, but went straight to voicemail. He tried to call Luke, but no answer from him either. Finally, he tried Matthew, Emily's oldest brother. "Hello?" Matthew's voice sounded tense, worried. "Matthew, it's Michael. Is Emily okay? The bakery is closed." A long silence followed. "You don't know?" Matthew finally asked. "Know what?" "Our father. His condition has worsened. Emily left for Vermont last night. The doctors say—" His voice broke. "They say he might need an expensive operation. Emily is devastated. She doesn't know how she's going to pay." Michael felt his heart tighten. "Matthew, listen to me. I'll arrange everything. Tell me which hospital your father is in." "No, you don't understand," interrupted Matthew. "Emily would be furious if you intervened. She's already upset by your recent distance. She thinks you've grown tired of her, of us, of this simple life we lead." These words hit him like a physical blow. "That's not true. I distanced myself because I was afraid. Afraid of my own feelings. Afraid of the intensity of what I felt for her. Afraid of giving up everything for a woman who might ultimately reject me." "It doesn't matter why," said Matthew firmly. "What matters is that my sister is suffering, and our father needs help. If you really care about her, you'll find a way to help her without hurting her pride." The communication cut off, leaving Michael alone under the pouring rain, his heart as heavy as his soaked clothes. Back in his office, he began making calls. Not to use his money directly, that he knew Emily would never accept, but to find alternative solutions. He contacted medical specialists, inquired about assistance programs, looked for options Emily might not have considered in her distress. Meanwhile, he reflected on his own reaction. Why had he distanced himself? The answer came to him with crystal clarity, because, for the first time in years, he had felt vulnerable. The armor he had built around his heart, made of wealth, power, emotional distance, was melting in Emily's presence, and that terrified him. But now, faced with the possibility of truly losing her, this fear seemed insignificant compared to the pain of her absence. 3 days passed without news from Emily. Michael continued to mechanically manage his company, signing documents, attending meetings. But his mind was elsewhere, in a small Vermont village where a woman with flower-covered hands was fighting to save her father. He had managed to identify the hospital where Emily's father had been admitted, and using his contacts, had arranged for one of the best orthopedic surgeons in the country to take an interest in his case as part of a medical research program. The doctor didn't know that Michael would personally cover all expenses. This information would remain strictly confidential. On the fourth day, while he was immersed in reading a contract, his phone vibrated. A message from Emily. "I'm back in New York. Can we talk?" His heart leapt. He replied immediately. "Of course. Where and when?" "Tonight, 7 p.m. at Central Park, near the Bethesda fountain." Michael stared at his phone, perplexed. Why did she want to meet him in a park, and not at the bakery or at her home? Her tone seemed distant, formal. A wave of apprehension passed through him. At 7 p.m. sharp, he arrived at the meeting place. The fountain, with its angel statue, stood out against the evening sky. Emily was already there, sitting on a bench watching the water below. She wore a simple beige coat, her hair tied back in a ponytail, her face pale and drawn with fatigue. "Emily," he said softly as he approached. She looked up but didn't smile. "Michael, thank you for coming." He sat beside her, sensing an invisible but palpable distance between them. "How is your father?" "Better," she said. "Strangely better, in fact. A doctor, a renowned specialist, has taken an interest in his case. He's talking about a new surgical technique that could greatly improve his mobility." She looked at him directly. "You wouldn't have anything to do with that, by any chance?" Michael hesitated. Lying would be easy, but it would betray the trust they had built. "I might have made a few calls," he finally admitted. Emily sighed but didn't seem angry. "I should have expected it." "I didn't want to offend you," he said quickly. "I just wanted to help without compromising your pride." "My pride," she repeated, as if the word had a bitter taste. "Do you know what pride is, Michael, for someone like me? It's not arrogance or stubbornness. It's the only thing I have left when everything else seems to be falling apart." He lowered his eyes, accepting her silent reprimand. "But," she continued, her voice softening slightly, "I didn't come here to reproach you for your help. I wanted to talk about us." Michael felt his heart accelerate. "Us?" Emily turned to him, her eyes betraying an inner struggle. "These past months have been unexpected. You entered my life like a hurricane, upending everything I thought I knew about myself, about what I wanted." "Is that a bad thing?" he asked softly. "I don't know," she admitted honestly. "It's frightening. You represent so many possibilities, but also so many uncertainties." "What uncertainties?" She took a deep breath. "I wonder if what you feel is real, or if it's just a phase, a distraction from your usual life. I wonder if one day you won't wake up and realize that this small baker and her modest life are not enough for a man like you." These words hurt him more than he thought possible. "How can you think that, after all the time we've spent together?" "Because," she said softly, "you disappeared, without explanation, for weeks." Michael ran a hand through his hair, trying to explain. "I pulled away because I was afraid," he finally admitted. "Not of getting bored with you, never. But afraid of the intensity of what I felt, afraid of everything I would be willing to give up to be with you." She looked at him with surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean that for the first time since I left my farm in Louisiana, I found myself questioning all my priorities, wondering if everything I had built, my company, my fortune, my reputation, was really worth anything compared to the joy I feel simply being near you." Emily remained silent, digesting his words. "I didn't expect this," he continued. "I wasn't looking to fall in love. It caught me off guard and my reaction was to run away. It was cowardly, I know." "In love," she repeated, her voice barely audible. Michael realized what he had just said. Those words he hadn't spoken in decades had crossed his lips naturally, without premeditation. "Yes," he said simply. "I'm in love with you, Emily. And it terrifies me." She looked away, staring at the water in the fountain that reflected the last lights of the day. "You know what terrifies me? It's that I think I love you too, and I don't know what to do with that feeling." These words, spoken with such vulnerable honesty, gave rise to a hope within him that he hardly dared embrace. What exactly frightens you? Everything, she said with a small, nervous laugh. What will happen if we try and it doesn't work? What will become of the bakery, my brothers and sister? How can I risk everything I've worked so hard for a feeling? Michael took her hand in his, reassured when she didn't pull away. I can't promise you that everything will be perfect. No one can. But I can promise you that I will never ask you to abandon what's important to you. We'll find a way to make things work. Together. Emily was looking at him now, her eyes searching his, as if she could read the truth in them. You talk as if it were simple. Not simple, he corrected, but possible. Just like making a perfect croissant isn't simple but possible with the right ingredients, the right technique, and a lot of patience. A slight smile appeared on her lips. Now you're using bakery metaphors. I've really changed you. For the better, I hope, he said, smiling back. She squeezed his hand. I need time, Michael. To think. To be sure. To find how to reconcile my feelings with my responsibilities. I understand, he said, even though part of him wanted to protest, wanted to convince her immediately. I'll give you all the time you need. They sat in silence, hand in hand, watching the sun disappear completely below the horizon, giving way to a starry night above New York. 2 weeks later, Emily appeared in his office. She wore a simple floral cotton dress, completely out of place among the suits and expensive minimalist decor. She had discovered that Michael owned the building where the bakery operated. He had bought it months earlier, through a shell company, not to make a profit but to protect her. She had also discovered that he had asked the neighboring developer to revise his project, keeping the bakery space intact, even expanding it to include a small cafe with tables on the sidewalk. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, her voice oscillating between gratitude and pain, her hands trembling as they did when she decorated cakes under pressure. Michael was standing near the window of his office, caught off guard by her sudden appearance. How did you find out? The notary, she said. He came to the bakery this morning to give me a new lease. A 20-year lease, at a rent lower than what I'm currently paying. When I asked who the new owner was, he mentioned a company. I did some research. She advanced into the office, stopping in front of his imposing mahogany desk. You bought the building. You saved the bakery. You arranged everything, in secret. Michael took a deep breath. Yes. Why not tell me? Because you would have rejected it, he said simply. You would have seen it as charity, as an attempt to buy your affection. Isn't that what it was? She asked, her intense gaze fixed on him. No, he replied firmly. It was my way of protecting something precious. Not just you, but what you represent. This bakery isn't just a business, Emily. It's a sanctuary of authenticity in a world that sorely lacks it. It's a place where people aren't judged by the brand of their clothes or the contents of their wallet, but by the humanity they share. He approached her slowly. I didn't buy this building to impress you or to put you in debt to me. I did it because I couldn't bear the thought of this little corner of paradise disappearing due to greed and indifference. Emily observed him, her expression unreadable. And the new project? The bakery extension? The cafe? Michael smiled slightly. That was a bit selfish. I imagined a place where I could sit for hours, watch you work, savor your creations without having to pretend I was just passing by. A silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken words. Michael waited, his heart beating at an irregular rhythm, uncertain of her reaction. Finally Emily spoke, her voice soft but firm. I should be angry. I should feel manipulated, controlled. And you don't? He asked, fearing the answer. No, she said, seeming surprised herself. I feel grateful and confused, because you did exactly what I would have refused if you had proposed it to me, yet it was the perfect solution. She came closer to him, reducing the distance between them. You know me better than I thought. I tried, he said softly. I listened. I observed. I learned. Why? She asked, her gaze seeking his. Why take so much trouble for a simple baker? Because you're not simple, he replied with disarming sincerity. You're extraordinary. You're brave and determined and generous beyond reason. You're authentic in a world of pretense. You create beauty and joy with your hands day after day, without ever losing your smile or your kindness. He took a deep breath. Because you taught me that life has a texture, a temperature, a flavor. You taught me that slowness isn't a weakness, but a wisdom, like making a good soufflé which can't be rushed, that some things can't be bought, they must grow at the right time, like sourdough. The silence that followed was punctuated only by the hum of the air conditioning and the beats of two hearts learning to synchronize, like the bells of St. Patrick's Cathedral ringing the hours. Emily approached him, and for the first time, it was she who touched his hand. "You really ruined all the croissants you tried to make," she said, a tear rolling down her face but now with a smile on her lips. "But maybe you could try again. And this time, I promise to have more patience." Michael felt his heart race at these words. "Does that mean—" "It means I've made my decision," she said softly. "I've thought about it, as I told you I would. I've weighed all the uncertainties, all the risks. And I realized that the greatest uncertainty would be not trying, not giving us a chance." She took his two hands in hers. "I don't know how this will work. I don't know how we'll reconcile your business meetings and my baker's hours. I don't know what your associates or my customers will think. I don't know if we'll succeed." She smiled, a bright smile that lit up her entire face. "But I know I want to try, with you. Together." At that moment, in that cold and impersonal office, something magical happened. Two different worlds merged, not by erasing each other, but by creating something new, something unique, like two ingredients that, when mixed together, create a flavor that neither could produce alone. In the months that followed, they built something that neither had imagined possible. It wasn't a fairy tale where the rich man saves the poor woman. It was a story where two wounded human beings, each in their own way, learned that vulnerability isn't a weakness, that asking for help doesn't diminish anyone, and that true love doesn't happen like lightning, but develops slowly like a dough rising during the cold winter night, layer by layer, until it creates something whole, nourishing, capable of satisfying the deepest hunger of the soul. The bakery expanded to include an elegant but welcoming cafe. Customers from all walks of life gathered there, businessmen in suits alongside students with colored hair, mothers chatting with local artists. The place became a crossroads, where social differences faded in the face of the shared pleasure of a perfect pastry and a well-prepared coffee. Michael still spent his mornings at the bakery, always learning, slowly improving. His croissants were no longer disasters, even if they still didn't reach the perfection of Emily's. But each day he came a little closer to that ideal. Just as each day, their relationship deepened, gained in texture, complexity, flavor. "I think we should invite your parents to return to New York," said Michael one evening, as they were closing the bakery together. Emily, who was wiping the counter, stopped short. "What? Your father is doing much better after the operation, isn't he? And your mother has always said she felt isolated in Vermont, far from her children." Emily put down her cloth, reflecting. "Yes, but where would they live? The apartment above the bakery is already too small for me and my siblings." Michael smiled. "I might have an idea." The following weekend, he took Emily to visit a small building on a quiet street a few steps from the bakery. It was an old but well-maintained building, with large windows and a small garden in the back. "What is this?" asked Emily, curious. "A possibility," he answered. "There are 4 apartments. One for your parents, one for Matthew, who will soon finish his studies, one for Charlotte when she's older, and one, perhaps, for us one day, if you'd like." Emily looked at him amazed. "Michael, I can't accept this." "It's not a gift," he said quickly. "It's an investment. An investment in a family. In our future, perhaps." He took her hands in his. "I don't want to buy you, Emily. I want to build something with you. Something that's a balanced mix of our two worlds." She considered him for a long time, then smiled. "Like a recipe." "Exactly," he said, relieved by her understanding. "Like a recipe where each ingredient keeps its unique flavor, but together they create something better." Emily turned to look at the building again. "It really is beautiful, and just a few steps from the bakery." "I thought that would be important." She turned to him, a question in her eyes. "When you say, perhaps for us, one day, what does that mean exactly?" Michael felt his heart accelerate. "It means that I'm thinking of a future with you, a future in which we share more than a love for American pastries, a future in which we wake up together every morning and fall asleep together every night." "Are you asking me?" she began, hesitant. "Not yet," he said softly. But soon, perhaps, when you're ready, when we're both ready. Emily smiled, rising on her tiptoes to place a light kiss on his lips. I'm starting to think I might be ready sooner than I imagined. That night, returning to his penthouse for what seemed like the 1000th time, Michael looked around with new eyes. This luxurious but sterile space had been his refuge for years. Now it seemed empty, devoid of warmth, of personality. He made a decision. The next day, he would begin looking for a buyer. It was time for a new chapter. Emily's parents returned to New York a month later. Mr. Sullivan, walking slowly but without pain thanks to his new hip prosthesis, and Mrs. Sullivan, radiant at the idea of reuniting all her children under one roof. Michael had feared their reaction. How would they welcome this businessman who had upended their daughter's life? But his concerns proved unfounded. Mr. Sullivan, a former baker who had worked hard all his life, recognized in Michael not the suit or the bank account, but the hands that were learning to work the dough, the humility of someone starting from the bottom, the determination of someone who refuses to give up in the face of failure. "So you're the apprentice my daughter has talked so much about," said Mr. Sullivan with a mischievous smile during their first meeting. "My daughter says you have talent." "She's too generous," replied Michael, sincerely touched. "I'm far from having her expertise." "Expertise is acquired," the old man said wisely. "What matters is passion, and from what I see—" He glanced toward Emily, who was arranging flowers in a vase, softly humming. "You don't lack passion." Mrs. Sullivan, for her part, adopted him almost instantly. "Finally someone who makes my daughter smile," she said, taking him aside. Since she took over the bakery, she carried so many responsibilities, too many for her young shoulders. But now she sings while she works, like before. The apartment that Michael had prepared for them was simple but comfortable, adapted to Mr. Sullivan's needs, with a spacious kitchen for Mrs. Sullivan, who still loved to prepare traditional Vermont dishes, and most importantly, there was enough space for the whole family to gather for Sunday dinners, a tradition that Emily had had to abandon when her parents left for Vermont. One Sunday evening, as the family was gathered around the table enjoying a delicious pot roast prepared by Mrs. Sullivan, Michael observed the scene with a sense of wonder. Matthew, recently graduated, was animatedly discussing his new position in an engineering firm. Charlotte, now a teenager, was showing her mother photos of her latest dance recital. Luke, who had grown several inches in recent months, was telling his father a joke he had heard at school. And Emily, sitting across from him, was looking at him with eyes that reflected exactly what he felt, a deep gratitude for this simple but precious moment, this reunion of loved ones, this reconstituted family. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly while conversations continued around them. "I'm thinking," he said slowly, "that I've never been as rich as I am at this moment." She smiled, understanding perfectly what he meant. "And I think I've never been as free." They looked at each other across the table, sharing a moment of deep connection that no one else could see or understand, a sweet secret between two people who had weathered their own storms to find themselves in this safe harbor. Later that night, walking hand in hand along the Hudson River, they stopped to watch the city lights reflect in the dark water. New York, this city of contrasts, of wealth and poverty, of tradition and innovation, of past and future, seemed different seen through their loving eyes. "I have something to tell you," said Michael, turning to her. "You look serious," Emily noted, a trace of concern in her voice. "It is serious," he confirmed. "I sold my penthouse." "What? When? Why?" The questions tumbled out. "Last week. Because—" he hesitated, seeking the right words. "Because I want to start a new life. A life that has meaning. A life that isn't defined by what I own but by what I share." He took both her hands. "I don't want to live in a place that only reminds me of my past loneliness. I want to create a new home, with you, if you'd like." Emily looked at him, her eyes bright in the light of the street lamps. "Michael Reynolds, are you asking me to move in with you?" "Yes," he said simply. "In the apartment in the building, the one I mentioned. It's empty, waiting to be filled with life, with laughter, with the smell of freshly baked pastries, with us." Emily considered him for a long time, her face reflecting a myriad of emotions: surprise, joy, hesitation, hope. "It's a big step," she finally said. "I know," he agreed, And we can take it slowly. Start with a few nights a week, perhaps. See how we adapt to living together." She smiled, touched by his consideration. "You've really changed. The Michael I met a year ago would probably have bought a castle and installed me in it without asking my opinion." He laughed, recognizing the truth in her joke. "And the Emily I met would have categorically refused out of sheer pride." "We've both changed," she said softly. "For the better, I think." She rose on her tiptoes, framing his face with her hands, and kissed him tenderly. "Yes," she murmured against his lips. "I want to create a home with you, a place that's truly ours. Neither your world nor mine, but something new that we'll build together." That night, walking arm in arm toward their shared future, Michael realized that true luxury wasn't in expensive objects or prestigious addresses, but in the possibility of sharing his life with someone who truly saw him, who understood him deeply, who loved him not despite his imperfections, but with them. The following spring brought many changes. Sullivan's Bakery had become a must-visit location, mentioned in tourist guides and culinary blogs as a hidden treasure of New York. Emily had hired 3 full-time assistants, personally trained by her to maintain the quality and authenticity that made the establishment's reputation. Michael had also transformed his company. Inspired by his experience with Emily, he had reoriented Reynolds' development toward the rehabilitation of historic neighborhoods, preserving their unique character and supporting small local businesses rather than replacing them with international chains. This new direction had initially been met with skepticism by his associates, but the results spoke for themselves. The projects attracted ethical investors and created lasting value both financially and socially. Their apartment had become a true home, a harmonious mix of their 2 styles. Michael's designer furniture coexisted with more rustic pieces chosen by Emily. The kitchen, of course, was the heart of their space, equipped like a professional chef's, but maintaining a warm and welcoming atmosphere. One May evening, while the windows were open to let in the lilac-scented air, Emily was preparing a strawberry tart while Michael read the newspapers at the kitchen table. "I think it's time," Emily suddenly said without looking up from her dough. "Time for what?" asked Michael, distracted by an article on the economy. "Time to make things official." Michael looked up, suddenly fully attentive. "What do you mean?" Emily smiled, continuing to work her dough with expertise. "I mean, it's perhaps time for you to make an honest woman of me, as they say." The newspaper slipped from Michael's hands. "Emily, are you asking me to marry you?" She laughed, her face radiant with joy and amusement. "Well, someone had to do it, and you seem so nervous these past weeks. I thought I'd spare you that agony." Michael stood and approached her, astonished. "How did you know?" "Michael," she said tenderly, "you checked your pocket 10 times during our dinner last night, and I found a catalogue of engagement rings in your drawer last week." He shook his head, both embarrassed and amused. "I wanted it to be perfect. I had planned a dinner on a boat on the Hudson River with a violinist, and Emily placed a flower-covered finger on his lips. That's exactly why I had to intervene. We aren't characters in a romantic novel, Michael. We're real, imperfect, and that's what makes our love special." She was right, of course. Their story wasn't a perfectly orchestrated fairy tale. It was messy, unpredictable, sometimes difficult, but authentic. Deeply, wonderfully authentic. Michael smiled, then spontaneously knelt, taking her flowery hand in his. "In that case, Emily Sullivan, extraordinary woman who transformed my life with flour, butter, and limitless generosity, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Emily's eyes filled with joyful tears. "Yes, Michael Reynolds, stubborn man who learned to make croissants for love, I will marry you." He took from his pocket the small box he had been carrying for 2 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. Inside was a simple but elegant ring, a solitaire on a white gold setting, not ostentatious but of undeniable quality, like their love. "It's perfect," Emily murmured, as he slid it onto her finger. "Like you," he replied, rising to kiss her. That evening, as they shared the news with Emily's family by phone, receiving enthusiastic blessings and congratulations, Michael reflected on the path traveled since that first croissant in the small bakery. How a simple act, entering a business by chance, had triggered a series of events that had transformed his life in unimaginable ways. Later, lying in their bed, Contemplating their future together, Emily asked him, "Do you ever miss your old life? The private jets, the important meetings, the power?" Michael considered the question seriously. "I don't regret the experiences or the lessons. They led me to you, after all. But that life was like an elaborate cake with too much icing, impressive to look at, but ultimately not very satisfying." He tenderly caressed her face. "What we have now is like your sourdough bread, simple in appearance but of incomparable richness and depth, created with patience, with love, with an attention to details that make all the difference." Emily smiled, snuggling against him. "You've become a poet, Michael Reynolds." "No," he replied, kissing her on the forehead. "Just a man who has finally learned the difference between value and price." 2 years later, on a warm summer day, Sullivan's bakery was exceptionally closed to the public. Inside, however, there was a flurry of activity. Garlands of fresh flowers adorned the walls. Scented candles were strategically placed, and at the center of the shop, where the counter usually stood, a long table had been set up, covered with a white linen tablecloth and vintage dishes. Emily and Michael had decided to celebrate their second wedding anniversary exactly where it all began, in the small bakery that had changed their lives. Not with a grand reception in a prestigious venue, as some might have expected from the now famous couple, formed by the visionary entrepreneur and the starred baker, but with an intimate dinner gathering only their closest friends and family. The bakery itself had evolved, just like them. It had expanded to include not only the cafe initially planned, but also a small baking school upstairs, where Emily shared her expertise with passionate apprentices. However, despite its growing success, the establishment had maintained its soul. That authentic warmth, that respect for traditions, that meticulous attention to detail that had initially attracted Michael. "Need help?" he asked, entering the kitchen where Emily was putting the finishing touches on a spectacular 3-tiered cake. She looked up, smiling at the sight of her husband in his apron. After 2 years of regular practice, he had become surprisingly competent, capable of preparing a batch of croissants on his own that, while not yet equaling Emily's, were nevertheless delicious and perfectly formed. "You could prepare the whipped cream," she suggested, focused on the elegant pattern she was piping on top of the cake. Michael complied with pleasure, savoring these simple moments of culinary collaboration that had become a precious part of their daily life. He often watched Emily work, always amazed by the grace with which she transformed simple ingredients into extraordinary creations. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, noticing his contemplative gaze. "Us," he replied honestly. "About everything that has changed, and about everything that has remained exactly as it should be." Emily smiled, understanding perfectly. Their life had transformed dramatically since their meeting, but the essence of their relationship, that mutual respect, that reciprocal admiration, that willingness to build something together, had remained unshakable. Michael had merged his company with several other organizations, sharing the same values, creating a consortium dedicated to sustainable and equitable urban development. He worked fewer hours, but with more impact, using his experience and resources to support projects that preserved cultural heritage, while creating economic opportunities for local communities. Emily, for her part, had published a successful recipe book and had become a respected figure in the baking world, often invited to give lectures on artisanal entrepreneurship and the importance of preserving culinary traditions. But despite her growing fame, she remained true to her roots, still spending several hours a day with her hands in flour, creating the pastries that delighted her customers. "The guests should be arriving soon," said Emily, adding a final golden touch to the cake. "I should go change." "Just 1 more minute," requested Michael, approaching her. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder to admire her work. "It's magnificent, like everything you do." She turned in his arms to face him, leaving a slight trace of flour on his shirt, a familiar detail that always made him smile. "We did it, didn't we?" "Against all odds." "Yes," he agreed. "We found the perfect recipe." They kissed tenderly, savoring this moment of calm before their loved ones arrived. An hour later, the bakery was resonating with laughter and animated conversations. Emily's parents, now fully settled in New York, were recounting embarrassing anecdotes from her childhood. Matthew, recently engaged to a brilliant architect he had met during one of Michael's projects, was passionately discussing their plans for an eco-friendly house. Charlotte, who had secured a place in a prestigious dance school, was showing Luke, now a teenager, some basic steps. Paul, Michael's longtime assistant turned close friend, was toasting with the new associates of the consortium. In the midst of this joyful assembly, Michael drew attention by gently tapping his spoon against his glass. "I'd like to make a toast," he announced, taking Emily's hand in his. "To the anniversary of our union, of course, but also to something more universal, to those unexpected moments that changed the course of our lives." He looked tenderly at his wife. 3 years ago, I walked into this bakery by chance, escaping a boring meeting, simply looking for a coffee and perhaps a moment of respite. I didn't know I was about to discover much more than exceptional pastries." Emily squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with emotion. "I learned," continued Michael, "that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or properties, but in authentic moments shared with those we love. That true success isn't reaching the summit alone, but climbing the mountain together, helping each other through the difficult passages." He raised his glass. "To my wonderful wife, who taught me that the best things in life, like the best croissants, require time, patience, and a lot of love. And to all of you, our chosen and blood family, who enrich our lives with your presence." Everyone raised their glasses in response, hearts full and eyes bright. Later in the evening, as the party was in full swing, Emily discreetly drew Michael to a quiet corner of the bakery. "I have a surprise for you," she murmured, a mysterious smile on her lips. "Oh?" Michael looked at her with curiosity. Emily took his hand and gently placed it on her belly. "In about 7 months, there will be a new apprentice in our bakery. A very small one, who will have a lot to learn." Michael looked at her, dumbfounded, the realization slowly spreading across his face. "You mean, we're going to—" "Yes," she confirmed, radiant. "We're having a baby." A wave of emotions overwhelmed Michael. Joy, wonder, gratitude, love. He drew Emily into his arms, holding her close as if she were the most precious treasure in the world, which she was, in his eyes. "Thank you," he murmured into her hair, "for everything. For this new life we're creating together." Emily nestled against him, perfectly at home in his arms. "It's our masterpiece, isn't it? This life we've built. Imperfect, sometimes messy, but authentic and filled with love. The most beautiful of masterpieces," agreed Michael. "And it continues to improve every day." They rejoined their guests, keeping their precious secret for the moment, savoring this shared knowledge like one savors a delicious dessert, slowly, with a deep appreciation for every nuance of flavor, every texture, every moment of pure pleasure. Outside, New York lit up for the night, its lights twinkling like promises. Inside the small Brooklyn bakery, 2 people who should never have met, but whom destiny, or perhaps simply the irresistible aroma of freshly baked pastries, had brought together, were celebrating not the end of a story, but a new chapter of an ongoing adventure. For true love, like the best of baked goods, is never truly finished. It continues to nourish, to comfort, to surprise, day after day, year after year, transforming the ordinary into extraordinary by its simple, wonderful existence. The most beautiful love stories are not those that follow a path mapped out in advance, but those that are built step by step, with patience and courage, like kneading a dough that will become, with time and proper care, something truly exceptional.